The revolving doors of the Terrene Hotel spat yellow and frost out into a marble-polished lobby that smelled of bergamot and ozone. She stood for a moment, a lean figure in a charcoal trench coat still flecked with April sleet, and adjusted the battered hardshell case slung across her shoulder. Inside lay a prototype lens array she had coaxed to life over 18 sleepless months in Caltech's sub-basement, a pet project no grant committee had believed in until the billionaire behind Vail Orbital wired a 7-figure, exploratory gift, to her lab 3 days earlier. That money came with a single instruction: deliver a 10-minute proof of concept at tonight's closed-door investor forum. 10 minutes to justify new physics and, by extension, her entire future. Across the lobby, a crush of reporters surged like a rogue tide toward the elevator bank. Their cameras fired in mechanical staccato as hotel security tried to dam the flow. At the center of the swarm Eloan glimpsed Merrick Vail himself, tall, midnight suit flawless but for the rainwater darkening the cuffs. His expression was an autopsy of composure, cheekbones set in obsidian calm while his eyes, glacier blue and almost annoyed, searched for an exit that hadn't been blocked. She realized she was studying the man who, only minutes earlier, had been on every screen in O'Hare claiming quantum launch systems would make low Earth orbit as boring as a commuter train. Eloan shouldered past a bellhop, stepped onto the polished chessboard of black and white tiles, and made a decision that felt more like a reflex from some subroutine of defiance. She lifted her case high, slammed it down between Merrick and the nearest microphone boom, and triggered the lid. A fan of precision ground glass spilled outward in a glimmering fan. The reporters recoiled instinctively, fearing shatter. In the millisecond of their hesitation she caught Merrick's sleeve and yanked him sideways through a service corridor door. They barreled into semi-darkness that smelled of detergent and steam. For a full 10 seconds neither spoke, the only sound the distant snarl of frustrated press on the far side of the wall. When breath finally came, Eloan turned to find Merrick watching her with a curiosity bordering on mirth. "That was inventive," he said, straightening his cuffs with surgeon-like care. "You're welcome," she replied, retrieving the lens array before it was truly ruined. "I just saved your $1,000 tie from 1,000 flashing bulbs. And possibly your own career from a sudden overdose of publicity," he countered. Reporters would have eaten the unknown astrophysicist angle alive. "What do you want in return?" "Nothing," she said, dusting specks of lint off the optical glass. "Actually, one thing. Promise you'll never fall in love with me. I have research to do, and love stories have a way of derailing orbital mechanics." The billionaire's eyebrow arched as though someone had fed a wild variable into his private algorithm. Then a half-smile tugged at his mouth, quick, ephemeral, gone. "Done," he answered. "I don't fall in love. I acquire challenges, solve them, move on." "Good," Eloan said, shoving the lens panels back into the case. "Because my work isn't a challenge you can throw venture capital at until it behaves." Merrick's gaze flicked to the case, then back to her face, filing details as though they were stock tickers, freckles across the bridge of her nose, a rogue curl escaping her tightly pinned braid, the faint tremor in her left hand that betrayed adrenaline. "I respect that," he said. "Still, you should know the investors tonight will want more than diffraction patterns on a slide. They'll want a story." "I only tell the universe's story," she replied. "It's older and louder than any of us." Somewhere above, a freight elevator groaned to life. The clamor in the lobby shifted like weather, and Eloan realized the press pack had found a new lead. She exhaled, a breath she'd apparently been holding since the corridor door slammed. Merrick produced a slim business card from his breast pocket and offered it with a lawyer's precision. "If you need a quieter exit later, text this number. Use the word Zephyrine." "The prototype?" Eloan's voice betrayed surprise. No public document yet linked that code name with Vail Orbital's upcoming launch schedule. "How do you?" "I read grant proposals," he said, already turning toward a maintenance stairwell. "Yours had the most beautiful math I've seen in months. Good luck, Dr. Frost." Before she could frame a reply, he was gone, footsteps swallowed by concrete and steam. Eloan stood alone, heart hammering like a misaligned gyroscope. She had dragged a stranger into a corridor on instinct and extracted from him a promise she didn't truly understand. The absurdity of it threatened to bloom into laughter. Instead she sealed her case, squared her shoulders, and walked back toward the conference suites. The lens array was intact. Her 10-minute slot awaited. Somewhere on another floor, the man who claimed he never fell in love was recalibrating his schedule because she had asked him to. Eloan told herself none of that mattered. The only gravitational field she believed in tonight was the unoiled machinery of a dream bigger than both of them, catching the first scattered light of worlds still unborn. Yet as she pushed through the ballroom doors, she felt the faint tug of another orbit forming, something unpredictable, faint, but real enough to register. Later she would catalogue that instant like a spectral line, evidence that two bodies, however distant, had begun to bend space between them. A promise had been spoken, and the universe, notorious for its indifference, seemed suddenly attentive. The sleepless 48 hours after the Terrene Hotel incident unfurled like a double-exposed reel in Eloan's memory, a blur of clandestine elevator rides, espresso cups abandoned mid-sip, and furious scribbles across whiteboards that vanished beneath fresh equations before the ink had time to dry. By dawn of the third day she found herself seated at a walnut conference table on the 62nd floor of Vail Orbital's Chicago Annex, a glass box cantilevered over the river so daringly that the city seemed to tilt beneath it. Outside, gulls wheeled against low, gunmetal clouds. Inside, four attorneys in faultless navy suits formed an impassable crescent around Merrick Vail, as though he were a theorem that required rigorous peer review. Eloan felt strangely calm. The lab-born chaos of her life had taught her that paperwork was merely a slower form of entropy. Given enough time, every loose page in the universe curled at the edges. Still, when Merrick slid a sheaf of contracts across the table, the top sheet engraved with her full name and the project code, Zephyrine, she experienced a vertiginous moment of consequence. This, more than the applause at last night's investor forum or the unexpected standing ovation when her diffraction pattern blossomed on the 10-meter screen, made the venture real. Merrick spoke first, voice low enough that the air vents almost swallowed it. Standard R&D agreement, he said, tapping the document with a fountain pen whose nib looked sharp enough to incise titanium. Except for Schedule D. That part is unconventional. Schedule D was a single page of dense typeface set off by a discrete line of asterisks. At the top, bolded in a serif font that seemed both archaic and unassailable, stood the title, Covenant of Emotional Non-Involvement. Below it, paragraph 3.14, someone's private joke, perhaps, at the expense of mathematicians, outlined the rules. Neither party would engage in, initiate, or encourage any romantic entanglement with the other for the duration of the Zephyrine initiative. Any perceived breach would trigger a mandatory conflict resolution session mediated by corporate counsel, and, Eloan's eyebrows climbed here, could invalidate certain intellectual property clauses, redistributing patent ownership 50-50. She lifted her gaze to Merrick, who watched her without blinking, like an astronomer waiting for a distant quasar to wink out. "Your lawyers have a dramatic flair," she said. He leaned back, chair sighing under the movement. "My board fears scandals more than budget overruns. We give them prophylactic assurances where we can." One of the attorneys, a woman with steel-rimmed glasses and the stony composure of an alpine ridge, added, "The clause protects both of you. Allegations of impropriety can derail government licensing faster than faulty engines." Eloan considered that. In academia, whispers of favoritism or compromised mentorship could tarnish reputations beyond repair. In aerospace, where congressional subcommittees hunted missteps with predatory zeal, the fallout would be nuclear. Yet something in her balked at the clinical wording. Romance treated like a contaminant. Attraction reduced to a variables-killing constraint. She tapped the paragraph gently. "You understand that human hearts don't sign NDAs?" Merrick's expression flickered, an almost imperceptible glitch in his armor. "That is precisely why one must anticipate their failure state." The room's lighting changed as the sun broke through clouds. Bronze glare flooded the glass walls, scattering reflections of briefcases and silver laptops across the ceiling. Eloane saw her own reflection doubled over Merrick's shoulder, hair escaping its braid, lab coat exchanged for a rumpled blazer, eyes too bright from insomnia. The mirrored spectral of a scientist about to mortgage every waking moment to a billionaire who insisted feelings be quarantined like cosmic rays. She inhaled. Very well. I accept on two conditions. The attorneys shifted, pens poised. First, Clause 3.14 cannot be invoked by casual gossip. Breach must be documented by both parties, in writing, within 48 hours of the alleged event. No retroactive surprise ambushes. Merrick nodded once. Reasonable. Second, in the unlikely scenario the clause activates and we enter mediation, all active data rights regarding Zephyrin remain unfrozen. The science continues regardless of interpersonal variables. A murmur traveled the legal crescent, reluctance, calculation, eventual acquiescence. The woman in steel rims amended the sentence, her pen skating ice-clean loops. When she finished, she pushed the page toward Eloane. Initial here. Eloane's signature unfurled across the margin, a constellation of swift strokes. When Merrick took the pen next, he paused, glanced up. I intend to keep my promise, he said quietly. I don't do relationships. They're inefficient. You will find me a tireless collaborator, nothing more. She offered a noncommittal shrug. Astrophysics is full of systems that claim stability right until they collapse into novae. He signed. The attorneys slid the copies into embossed folders. Agreements secured, they dispersed with the silent choreography of chess pieces retreating from a finished opening. Only one person lingered, a lanky, silver-eyed man in a burgundy tie, who had watched the proceedings from a windowside perch. He unfolded from the sill and extended a hand. Calix Chaussee, Chief Strategy Officer, he said. I traffic in contingencies. And betting lines. My money says Schedule D lasts 6 months. Eloane released his grip, surprised to find warmth rather than cynicism. I hope you lose. Calix flashed a grin that suggested he rarely did. I hope I do too. A good romance boosts quarterly social metrics. But until then, welcome to the Orbital League. After he left, the room felt cavernous. Merrick approached the panoramic window, hands clasped behind his back, gaze fixed on the serpentine river. We lived in 412 days, he said without turning. First static fire next month. Your lens array must be flight rated by June. I figured, she replied, joining him at the glass. Tugs moved below like toy boats, shoving barges through slate water. I'll need full access to your vacuum testing bays in Mojave. You'll have them, he said. A pause thickened. Do you regret the covenant? She thought of night skies over Pasadena, the way sodium lights drowned the faint glow of galaxies she chased. She thought of this man beside her, who wielded capital the way others wielded adjectives, and of how easily one could grow to crave the orbit of someone whose gravity was composed of sheer will. Regret, she echoed, savoring the word's pale bitterness. Regret is a function of hindsight. Give me results first, data, launch telemetry, spectral returns. Then we'll see which emotions survive peer review. Merrick's reflection offered the ghost of a smile. Scientifically stated. They stood in parallel silence while the sun continued its climb, flooding the room with blinding brilliance until their silhouettes dissolved into each other on the glass. Neither moved to step away. Outside, wind buffeted the building, whispering along the steel skin like something wild trying to get in. Months unfolded the way film canisters develop under red light, slow, chemical, irreversible, until Eloane could no longer remember who she had been before the Zephyrin initiative calcified into daily reality. She traded Pasadena's marine haze for the baked ochre of the Mojave Flight Complex, a sprawling grid of hangars and high-bay clean rooms where sand found its way into every notebook spine no matter how often technicians vacuum-sealed the entrances. Her days began at 5 o'clock with propulsion briefings and ended past midnight inside the acoustic chamber, where she tuned the lens array while turbines howled through simulated ascent profiles loud enough to rattle teeth. Merrick inserted himself into that rhythm with the stealth of a comet altering an orbit, never obvious, but gravitationally inescapable. He appeared online from Tokyo at 3 in the morning to challenge an equation, materialized in person 3 hours later to sign procurement orders, vanished before sunset on a jet that left contrails like chalk across the sky. Most CEOs delegated, Merrick annotated. He sent marked-up PDFs full of questions so precise they felt surgical, then surprised her by showing up in coveralls to help torque flange bolts when the tech crew hit overtime limits. Once, during a 60-hour stress test, she woke from a micronap at her workstation to find a stainless steel travel mug beside the oscilloscope, no logo, but she recognized his impossible espresso blend by smell. The note taped to the handle read simply, "Non-romantic caffeine allocation, per Schedule D, consume and proceed." The clause they had both signed became an inside joke disguised as a firewall. Their messages crackled with disclaimers. Observed micrometeoroid flux appears romantic, recommend emotional mitigation, he would text after a successful vacuum trial. She would counter with telemetry files titled platonic_love_runs_203a.csv. Legal never complained, metrics were up, morale higher. Engineers, starved for comedy in a world of risk matrices, began tracking the best quips on a whiteboard labeled Forbidden Feelings Leaderboard. Still, the covenant imposed boundaries as real as the blast walls that cordoned off the solid fuel bunker. At off-site dinners Merrick chose seats opposite hers, on group flights he absorbed himself in market reports rather than conversation. During a photo op with NASA inspectors he adjusted her lapel mic with 2 gloved fingers as if she were a delicate instrument, then stepped back exactly 4 inches, the minimum distance, she later measured on footage, that kept their silhouettes from overlapping. Watching the video alone in her dorm-style quarters, Eloane felt a pang so sharp it qualified as data, proof that proximity could hurt even when nothing inappropriate transpired. August brought Mojave's lethal noon temperatures and the first ground ignition of the LV-9 engine. The flame trench coughed out a plume bright as a wedding veil hurled into the sun, shock waves slapped the desert hard enough to set off car alarms 10 miles away. Eloane stood beside Merrick on the bunker balcony, each of them in flame-retardant suits that erased individuality. She yelled over the roar, "That impulse curve is 5% above spec." He didn't answer. Instead he lifted a handheld spectrometer, scanning the exhaust for telltale silica signatures that would indict her mirror coatings if they'd eroded under heat. The display bloomed green, no ablation. Without looking up he gave her a thumbs up. She wanted to grab his gloved hand and shake it with the ferocity of shared triumph, but the memory of paragraph 3.14 hovered like an over-aggressive guardian angel. She settled for a shaky grin behind her visor. Night in the desert tasted of metal and chamomile. The leadership team gathered around a portable screen to christen the flight article that would carry her instrument. Names scrolled by, Aurora, Pioneer, the predictable pantheon of aerospace clichés, until Merrick clicked to a slide labeled Zephyrine. The room fell into a brief hush. It was unusual, archaic, lyrical in a way cryogenic pumps were not. Calyx Chaussee raised an eyebrow. Wind from the west, if my Greek holds. Gentle west wind, Merrick corrected, eyes pinned to Eloane with unsettling precision. Intermittent but transformative. Heat rose behind her earlobes. Her own middle name, kept off publications to avoid misspellings, was Zephyrine, a family relic from a grandmother who read aloud the Odyssey instead of fairy tales. She had never spoken it to anyone at Vale Orbital. You look like you swallowed a magnet, Calyx teased. Problem with the poetry? She managed a controlled exhale. None. It's beautiful. No one asked why Merrick had chosen it, commanders enjoyed mystical privileges. Yet later, alone in the optics lab, she replayed the moment in her head, testing different explanations. Either he'd dredged it from personnel records, stealthy but impersonal, or he'd witnessed some scrap of correspondence, a birthday card from her mother taped over her workstation. Both possibilities unsettled her for reasons she refused to label. Autumn trimmed the daylight, work lights burned longer. They relocated to Cape Canaveral's vertical integration facility, a cathedral of steel girders where humidity fogged instruments before dawn and thunderstorms slashed evening skies. Late one storm-racked Friday, lightning tripped a breaker bank, freezing a crane with Zephyrines payload suspended midair. Shouting erupted on every floor, a swing of more than 2 degrees risked shattering the lens array beyond salvage. Eloan sprinted up 4 flights, lungs raw, and found Merrick already perched on the catwalk console, overriding safeties with manual inputs. Sweat streaked his hair despite the air conditioning, but his voice stayed steady as he coached the riggers. Counter-rotate 3 mm on Y, wait for the ebb. Now. She squeezed past to watch the load stabilize, wire tension humming through the superstructure like a plucked cello string. The machinery stilled in delicate equilibrium. Wind and thunder raged outside, but inside the payload barely quivered. Someone exhaled a prayer. Only then did Eloan notice blood seeping through Merrick's shirt sleeve. He'd ripped his forearm on jagged conduit during the scramble. Instinct trumped contracts, she caught his wrist to elevate the cut. Their gloves lay discarded somewhere below, so skin met skin. A jolt rippled through her chest, primal as a solar flare. His pulse beat against her fingertips, too fast, entirely human. He did not pull away. Instead he murmured, too soft for anyone else, document the breach or dress the wound. Choose quickly. She chose iodine and gauze. In the first aid alcove the fluorescent lights buzzed as she disinfected the gash. He watched her work with an intensity that made speech feel irrelevant. When it was done, she tucked the trash into a biohazard bin and forced levity into her tone. There. All patched. No feelings spilled. Plenty spilled, he corrected. Just none recorded. Rain hammered the roof hard enough to mimic applause. She met his gaze and realized he was frightened, not of injury, but of something gaining delta V in the uncharted space between them. Words gathered in her throat like a rising tide, but an intercom crackled, the crane systems reset, operations to resume. Duty sliced through possibilities like a hatch ceiling. They stepped apart. Thanksgiving arrived. The team devoured rehydrated turkey in the clean room break area while launch optical windows underwent last-minute polishing. Merrick flew to D.C. for a classified briefing, leaving Eloan a voicemail she listened to twice because the first time her heart drowned out the audio. I'm presenting Zephyrine as a dual-use platform, but I won't sign unless they protect your spectral data. If they balk, I walk. He returned empty-handed yet oddly triumphant. The Defense Department wanted more concessions than he would cede, he had told them no. A private company refusing government billions was headline material, but Merrick shrugged off the board's alarm. Any investor can bankroll rockets, he told them in the closed session Eloan attended as technical witness. Few can bankroll integrity. That is our market differentiator. When the board adjourned, one director muttered that the CEO's judgment was compromised, perhaps romantically. Schedule D surfaced like a torpedo. Eloan flashed to the words mandatory conflict resolution session. She prepared to defend herself, but Merrick spoke first, voice cool as cryo-fuel. She and I are governed by a covenant you drafted. If you doubt its efficacy, tear it up. Otherwise, trust the process you demanded. Silence rippled, brittle and dangerous. Then the chairwoman exhaled through her nose, a gesture of reluctant respect. Very well. Carry on. Afterward, in the corridor outside the boardroom, Eloan whispered, you challenged your own firewall. I challenged paranoia, he said. There's a distinction. One slows launches, one merely tests assumptions. He hesitated. Does it bother you that people assume you're my weakness? I'm too busy reducing sensor noise to care. She attempted a smile. But if the rumor mill accelerates, we might both burn. Merrick slipped his hands into pockets as if resisting the urge to reach for her. Then we stay in nominal range. Orbital Mechanics 101. She almost laughed, because orbital mechanics were governed by mutual pull, not restraint. Yet she nodded and walked away before anything irreversible ignited. By year's end the Zephyrine launch vehicle stood fully stacked on Pad 39C, white paint gleaming beneath xenon floodlights like the pillar of a temple to futures no one could yet imagine. Eloan spent Christmas Eve alone in the telemetry bunker, running Monte Carlo simulations of ascent winds while a tinny playlist crooned carols. Near midnight an encrypted file pinged her inbox, preliminary guidance video, eyes only. The clip opened on Merrick in the empty VIF, camera handheld, face lit by the rocket's alabaster reflection. He spoke quietly, words echoing in the cavern, "The world assumes we are a risk vector, L. Let them. Risk is the engine. I chose Zephyrine because a west wind carries sailors beyond sight of land and asks them to believe in invisible geographies. That's what this craft will do. Happy Christmas, partner." She watched twice, the second time noting how the shot trembled when he said partner, as though the phone itself registered an aftershock. She closed her laptop and stepped outside. A cold Atlantic wind laced with kerosene whipped her hair across her face. Overhead, stars blistered the sky, ancient and aloof, yet suddenly nearer than she had ever dared believe. Somewhere below that same firmament, Merrick Vale obeyed a contract designed to keep hearts inert, even as his every calculation nudged theirs closer to collision. Eloan pressed her palm to the launch pad's chilled railing, felt vibrations from fueling pumps reverberate through bone, and understood she was already in freefall. The only uncertainty now was whether the impact would be catastrophe or breakthrough, and in aerospace those two outcomes were often identical until the smoke cleared, snow sifted down on the glass roof of PAL Expo Hall like static across a monitor, veiling the floodlit banners of the Geneva International Aerospace Assembly. Inside, 1,000 delegates milled beneath suspended rocket stages and full-scale mock-ups of lunar habitats. Eloan moved through them with rehearsed composure, lanyard swinging against her charcoal suit, though every cell in her body throbbed with anticipation. Zephyrine's optical core was about to receive its first public unveiling, and she would present. The main auditorium resembled a concert venue, tiered seats, a 40-meter LED wall, a dais framed by programmable light panels that pulsed in constellation patterns. Merrick stood stage left in a fitted midnight jacket, one hand tucked in his pocket, the other wrapped around a folded set of talking point cards he'd refused to read. He preferred improvisation. Calix Chaussee prowled the wings with an earpiece, corralling press and dignitaries like a ringmaster coaxing tigers into place. Backstage, Eloan laid her palm on the travel case that housed the prototype lens. Micro-scratches on the carbon fiber told the story of Mojave grit, Cape humidity, and sleepless nights in acoustic bays. She exhaled, steadying herself, when her phone buzzed. A push alert blinked on the lock screen. Breaking, Vale Orbital's secret neuromance pact exposed. Exclusive, Schedule D forbids CEO Merrick Vale and lead scientist Eloan Frost from engaging in romantic entanglement. Full PDF inside. Atlas and Arrow Investigative Desk. For a heartbeat she assumed it was a prank by the Mojave engineers. Then the link populated with her digital signature, a high-resolution scan taken from the contract itself. Her pulse spiked. Only legal, Merrick, and she possessed copies, all were cipher-locked. She felt the tremor of a fault line giving way. Across the stage, Merrick's phone lit simultaneously. Their eyes met. His expression did not change, but the temperature of the moment dropped as surely as if someone had opened the loading dock doors to the Alpine air. "Damage report," he asked Calix quietly. "We're triangulating the leak," Calix replied, already thumbing commands into his tablet. "But the PDF's gone viral. Hashtag Heartless Billionaire trending at 40,000 tweets per minute." The auditorium lights dimmed for the keynote. Their slot, Zephyrine slot, was in 12 minutes. Eloan grasped the edge of the equipment crate, trying to anchor herself. "Options?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Option A, proceed, ignore." Calix flicked a fingertip toward the stage schedule. "Option B, postpone, issue statement." Option C, nuke the feed, send everyone to cocktails, and pray Geneva enjoys scandal more than science. A ripple of commotion rolled through the audience as people checked phones. Whispers spread like brushfire. Eloane heard her own name hissed in half-dozen accents. Somewhere a camera flash strobed. Merrick's jaw flexed. Option B. I'll address it head-on. We can't pretend nothing happened. He climbed the short steps to the lectern, leaving Eloane in the wings. She felt oddly bereft, as if a tether had snapped. Ladies and gentlemen, Merrick began, voice amplified into cathedral clarity, before we discuss propulsion curves and orbital elevators, I need to speak to a circulating document. A hush descended. Screens throughout the hall filled with a still of the leaked PDF header. She saw her own name projected story-high beside his. The page you've read is real, he continued. It was drafted to protect our intellectual property from the kinds of allegations that so often plague joint ventures. Nothing more. Emotional neutrality keeps projects objective. That is all. Clicks and shudders erupted. He raised a palm for silence, gaze scanning rows of faces. For the record, I remain professionally, utterly uninvolved with Dr. Frost. Our collaboration is scientific, stringent, and, if today's agenda permits, revolutionary. Eloane felt each sentence like a pin driven through tissue. She understood the necessity, still, the public disavowal vibrated like feedback against her ribs. Around her, stagehands studiously avoided eye contact. In the press pit, a reporter shouted, "Are you saying you're incapable of personal attachment, Mr. Vale?" "I'm saying attachments are irrelevant to escape velocity," Merrick replied. "We're here to talk about engineering, not gossip." The house lights brightened, programmed to cue her entrance, yet no one looked at the illuminated mock-up behind him. All cameras fixated on the spectacle of denial. An organizer with a clipboard gestured frantically, "You're on." Eloane stepped forward, forced smile etched in place. Her heels met the first stair. And she stopped. Some interior gyroscope lost attitude. If she walked onto that stage now, every word about diffraction and exoplanetary spectra would be drowned by clickbait headlines. Frost turns up heat despite cold claws, she could practically write them herself. She pivoted instead, retreating into the curtain shadows. Calix saw, mouth forming a silent wait. But she was already moving, weaving through equipment crates, down metal stairs that clanged like alarm bells, into the service corridors beneath the expo center. The lower level smelled of generator oil and damp concrete. She followed exit signs until a door disgorged her onto a maintenance dock overlooking Lake Geneva. Snowfall had thickened into veils that blurred the water and the city's jewelry box lights beyond. Breath fogged before her as she strode to the edge, gripping the rail. Adrenaline ebbed, leaving cold clarity. The contract meant to shield her had been weaponized. No matter Merrick's motives, she was now a footnote in his public narrative, proof of his purported emotional sterility. The realization lodged like splintered glass. Footsteps crunched behind her. Calix appeared, coat unbuttoned, hair peppered with snow. He offered a phone. "He's looking for you." Whole boards erupting on back channels. Eloane shook her head. "Tell him I'm safe. That's all." Calix pocketed the device, leaning his elbows on the rail beside her. Wind knifed across the dock, fluttering his tie. "For what it's worth, I voted against Schedule D." Noted. Her voice was thin but steady. "You're thinking of bolting," he guessed. "I'm thinking of physics," she corrected. "Reaction forces. You push hard enough, the system pushes back. Maybe staying is the weaker vector." Calix exhaled a plume of steam. "If you disappear, investors panic. They'll assume the worst, breach of contract, poached IP, romantic meltdown. The sort of narrative that tanks launch windows." "Maybe the narrative needs a reset burn," she said. Tell the board I'll return when Zephyrines' safety is prioritized over optics. And Merrick? Tell him, she stopped. The lake lapped softly below, black and inscrutable. Tell him or don't. Either way, he'll calculate. Calyx straightened, snow crunching underfoot. Where will you go? Someplace without cameras. A radio quiet zone. She managed a half smile. Stars don't leak documents. He extended a hand, and she shook it, surprised at the warmth. For the record, he said, I had money on Schedule D lasting 6 months. Turns out scandal beat me by 2. She turned toward the dock doors, then hesitated. Calyx, whoever leaked the PDF had legal clearance. Find them. Because the next failure might not be reputational. His nod was solemn. Godspeed, Dr. Frost. 20 minutes later a private water taxi skimmed from a side pier, cutting a pale wedge through snowfall. Eloan sat alone under the canopy, Kay strapped beside her, Geneva's skyline receding into silver haze. Her phone vibrated non-stop, Merrick, legal, a flood of unknown numbers, but she placed it face down, watching snowflakes melt on the carbon shell that held her life's work. She replayed Merrick's voice in the auditorium, our collaboration is scientific, stringent. The precision that once thrilled her now felt surgical, excising something she hadn't realized was vital until it bled. Yet beneath the sting, she acknowledged a fiercer conviction, science deserved better than spectacle, and so did they, whatever they might mean beyond contractual variables. The taxi's prow lifted over small waves, engine humming. Somewhere east, beyond darkness and politics, the Zephyrine launch vehicle stood in gantry clamps, waiting for a guidance system only her optics could provide. The universe didn't care about tabloid hashtags, photons would arrive from distant suns regardless. She intended to meet them on her own terms. Snow blurred the shore to watercolor. Eloan tightened her coat, lips chapped by icy spray, and fixed her eyes on the invisible horizon where lake met night. She was neither fleeing nor surrendering, she was altering trajectory, performing the oldest maneuver in celestial mechanics, a gravity assist around adversity to gain velocity no engine could supply. Behind her, Geneva buzzed with controversy. Ahead lay silence wide enough to think. And in that silence she would decide whether a covenant written in fear could ever compete with a calling written in stars. A violet dawn seeped above Chicago, but the blinds in Merrick Vale's riverfront office stayed closed. He preferred the dark while sorting disasters. 3 calendar days had passed since Geneva, and the world outside his tempered glass now boiled with hashtags, shareholder lawsuits, and late-night comedy sketches in which an actor wearing mirrored aviators declared love a non-essential payload. None of it bothered Merrick as much as the unanswered calls. 41 attempts to reach Eloan Frost had routed straight to voicemail, and the silence inside those rings was beginning to sound like failure. Network security forensics offered small consolation. The Schedule D leak traced to a senior paralegal who had panic-emailed her college roommate, a tech blogger, after misreading a redlined version of the covenant. Fear of losing her job had evolved, through a predictable chain of retweets, into an international circus. The paralegal was fired, the board wanted more scalps. But firing people could not conjure Eloan back from whatever horizon she had sailed toward. At 5:12 his private inbox pinged, an address last used during field tests in the Mojave. Automated alert number 984, ionospheric platform Vanguard 03 unattended 67 hours. Manual reset required before storm entry T26H. Standard telemetry, except for a single, unparsable line appended in plain text, if you still believe in stars, bring coffee and rubber boots. Merrick froze. Vanguard 03 was one of Eloan's side experiments, a kite-tethered sensor array anchored to an abandoned airstrip in the San Rafael Desert of Utah. It filmed high-altitude lightning to refine Zephyrines' plasma sheath models. The platform could run autonomously, but after 72 hours without human handshake it dispatched a recall. Eloan had written that code, only she could have appended a human sentence to the template. He thumbed coordinates into the flight planner before the thought fully formed. Readiness was his native state. Within 40 minutes a Gulfstream G600 lifted off Midway, climbing into a bruised sunrise. He neither alerted corporate communications nor invited Calyx. The fewer observers, the fewer interpretations. While the jet arrowed west, he reread the alert, trying to decode the subtext. Bring rubber boots. Vanguard's sight sat on alkaline flats prone to flash floods. She was warning him. They touched down on a municipal strip outside Green River, Utah, at 9:40 local. A battered Sikorsky S-76 waited on the ramp. He rented it en route by wiring hazard pay directly to a freelance bush pilot who now regarded him with camel-hardened skepticism. Storm line rolls in afternoon, the pilot warned over rotor thrum. We'll have 20 minutes on site, tops. Merrick secured goggles, a thermos of espresso, and a Pelican case of replacement fuses, then climbed aboard. The helicopter skimmed over stratified mesas and labyrinthine slot canyons where ancient rivers had gnawed the rock to bone. Ahead, a charcoal wall of cumulonimbus towered 40,000 feet, its anviled crown flashing like a silent artillery barrage. They set down on cracked tarmac that dated back to Cold War bombing drills. A prefab fiberglass dome squatted near the runway, guy wires humming in rising wind. Merrick stepped onto salt-pitted concrete. Static raised the hair on his arms. Inside the dome the air stank of ozone, solder, and chamomile, a tea Alohan brewed when circuits misbehaved. She sat cross-legged on the floor among coils of fiber-optic cable, ponytail frayed, eyes ringed by sleepless violet crescents. A single LED lantern backlit her silhouette like a low-budget halo. Your ETA math was off by 11 minutes, she said without looking up, fingers dancing over a laptop scavenged from 3 different scrap models. I recalibrated for jet stream drift. I had to bribe Denver Center to open airspace, he countered, only then realizing how brittle relief could sound. He placed the thermos beside her boot. Non-romantic caffeine allocation. A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. Schedule D survives even here. Schedules don't survive lightning if the kites fry. How bad is it? She rose, brushing dust from her knees, and handed him a tablet displaying failure trees. Primary encoder's dead. If the storm hits before we reboot the data bus, we lose 3 terabytes of Boltec imaging and the array might tear loose. Is there any crew? He scanned the room, empty bunks, half-eaten protein bars. Or are you doing this solo because anonymity scales better than safety? Crew resigned when the scandal hit. Didn't want to ruin their LinkedIns. I signed the hazard waiver for one. She met his gaze steady as a surveyor's level. I didn't leak the covenant, Merrick. I never believed you did. He swallowed against the dryness. But you vanished. I needed vector change. Her shoulders lifted in a half-shrug. Silence lets me think. Thunder cracked, and the dome vibrated. Without another word they hauled car batteries and fresh servo boards across the salt pan to the anchor mast where 50 copper lines ascended into boiling sky. Sand scoured their cheeks, static tongues licked metal. Working in tandem they loosened torqued bolts, he bracing the wrench, she threading fiber through a waterproof gland, until sweat and alkali dust turned their gloves white. They communicated in nods, cabled to each other by urgency. Halfway through the swap a keening gust toppled an instrument tripod. It clanged off Merrick's shoulder, ripping fabric and flesh. Pain burst red, but he pressed gauze while Alohan resecured the tripod with parachute cord. The same surreal calm that had defined launch rehearsals settled over them. Disaster, once familiar, became merely another checklist. By 12:08 the final status light flickered green across their handhelds. Vanguard 03 spindle motors rearmed, the tether winch began spooling slack with a mechanical purr so satisfying Alohan could almost taste it. She keyed the satellite link, confirming data flow, streams of white-hot filament patterns arced across spectrogram windows. A fat raindrop exploded on the screen. Time to bail, Merrick said. Lightning spidered across the ceiling of cloud-like cracks in smoked glass. They sprinted for the dome as stroboscopic flashes turned the flats into negative photographs. Inside, breakers popped, power surge. Darkness swallowed them except for laptop glow. Then, with a sound like celestial canvas tearing, a bolt found the mast. Every surface incandescently glared, shockwave punched the dome's panels inward. Eloan stumbled, Merrick caught her elbow, yanked her down behind a steel supply cabinet as secondary discharges rip-rapped through the grounding grid. When senses returned, he was crouched inches from her face, breathing hard, the smell of scorched dust between them. Sirens in his bloodstream howled that Schedule D was the least relevant document on Earth. She touched his bleeding shoulder, voice a raw whisper. That laceration needs stitches. I've endured worse in board meetings. Board rooms don't bleed. She tore open an emergency kit, pressed disinfectant to the cut. The sting jerked a hiss from his teeth. Wind boomed against composite panels. For a long minute they listened to rain like gravel on the roof, the storm venting its nuclear rage. Finally it eased to a steady roar. Eloan exhaled first. Array survived, she murmured, reading live feeds still pulsing across the laptop. And we caught sprites at 2 millisecond resolution. Data worth every bruise. Merrick's laugh came broken. We nearly got ourselves vaporized to prove it. Risk is the engine, she echoed his own credo. Their eyes locked, gravity doubling in the narrow space. No attorney stood here to notarize restraint, no public lens intruded. Only the smell of ozone, the adrenaline, and the knowledge that either of them could lean a single inch and annihilate a contract drafted to survive everything except proximity. Outside, thunder rumbled farther away, its tantrum spent. A metallic scent filtered through shattered air filters, wet dust mixed with something sulfurous, like fresh stone sheared by impact. Do you smell that? Eloan asked. They pushed outside. The storm had sluiced topsoil from a shallow depression east of the mast, revealing a glint of crystalline structure in the mud. She knelt, pried loose a fist-sized shard, iridescent, honeycombed, unbelievably light. Merrick's eyes widened. That's aerolith-grade hexadite. Thermal coefficients half of current TPS tiles. It's nowhere on Geological Survey. Her voice broke into laughter, half wonder, half vast, exhausted joy. A comet fragment must have embedded here centuries ago. The storm excavated it. He turned the crystal in his hand. In cold light it refracted miniature suns. If analysis confirms, we can rewrite re-entry economics. Space elevators, skip gliders, everything. Wind tugged her hair across her cheeks, she didn't brush it away. The universe pays debts in strange coin, she said quietly. He answered without irony. Then this is yours. Ours, she corrected. The word tasted terrifying and inevitable. Distant rotor hum announced that the pilot, having weathered the storm aloft, was circling to land. Duty would soon reclaim them, reports, chain of custody for the meteorite, a furious board waiting to parse new liability. But for the span of a heartbeat they remained on a salt pan rimed with storm water, breathing ionized air, holding a fragment older than Earth and younger than their astonishment. Merrick studied the crystal once more, then Eloan, as though toggling between two equally uncharted data sets. The covenant ends if one saves the other for science, he said, repeating the invisible clause Calix had once joked about. You just saved Vanguard 03. Perhaps we're in breach. She wiped rain from her eyelashes. Perhaps the covenant saved us first, long enough to prove we could build something bigger than fear. Her hand closed over his on the stone. Let's see if the board can litigate starlight. Overhead the clouds parted to wide cobalt sky, lightning spent, as if granting temporary ceasefire. Their helicopter touched down, rotor wash scattering wet salt like snow. Behind them Vanguard 03's tether hummed, feeding new patterns of charged air into waiting servers, numbers that would inform trajectories, hull alloys, the next generation of ships meant to outrun storms altogether. Merrick tightened his grip on the meteorite. "First sample of the Zephyrine age," he said. Eloan matched his stride toward the waiting rotorcraft, both soaked, bleeding, grinning like fugitives who had robbed destiny and gotten away clean, for now. Neither could articulate what had truly changed in the dome. Change was still a larval thing, soft and sightless. But as the helicopter lifted, banking toward a sun-washed horizon, both felt something align inside their chests, the way instrumentation clicks into lock after months of calibration, announcing in a single perfect chime that the system is finally, gloriously, go. The helicopter dropped Merrick and Eloan at Page Municipal just after 1800 hours, its landing lights carving white scars through the dusk. A company jet waited on the adjacent apron, APU humming, fuselage glazed the color of jet fuel rainbows. They boarded without formalities, a single security aide hustling the meteorite sample in a padded nitrogen case. During climb-out the cockpit curtains remained open, daylight sliding off the canyons of the Colorado River far below. Merrick sat opposite Eloan at the conference table, right arm stitched and bandaged, shirt exchanged for a flight deck sweater that still smelled faintly of antiseptic. For 3 silent minutes they only watched each other's reflections in the perspex window, both knowing that the moment the seatbelt sign dimmed, the outside world would crash their fragile bubble. It happened at 1904. Calyx Chaussee's face filled the cabin screen, eyes silver bright with urgency. "Board called an emergency vote for 2200 hours Eastern," he said without preamble. "They have 2 resolutions prepared. 1. Remove Merrick as CEO on grounds of reckless conduct. 2. Freeze Zephyrine until an independent ethics panel can review the Covenant disaster and today's unscheduled field sortie." Merrick didn't react, but the muscle at his jaw fired once. "Who's whipping the votes?" "Gerald Wexler and the defense bloc. They're spooked by Geneva and furious you turned down the Pentagon licensing deal. They also got wind you flew into a storm with the company's most irreplaceable asset and no security escort." Calyx flicked a glance toward Eloan. Irreplaceable asset plainly meant her. "Your one shield is the material sample. If hexadite does what the handheld spec said, you've discovered the platinum of thermal protection. The board won't gut-shot the golden goose." Eloan leaned forward, voice hoarse from desert grit. "Then we need proof before the vote. Full compositional scan, emissivity curve, failure temp. Can we get a lab voucher and an autoclave slot in?" She checked her watch, "under 3 hours. Way ahead of you." Calyx's grin flashed. "I bullied the MIT Hyperspec team into a midnight session. But you'll have to stream live, they won't sign an NDA on blind trust. Send raw data, let them publish later." Merrick nodded. "Do it. And Calyx, start a rumor that I'm prepared to pledge personal shares to fund a spin-out around the mineral, contingency on my remaining CEO. Share pledge leaks in, 3, 2, 1. Calyx tapped his earpiece and disconnected. The jet throttled higher, burrowing east. Eloan unbuckled, crossed to the storage credenza, and retrieved the nitrogen case. She set it between them, thumb danced over the biometric latch. Inside, the shard lay on a velvet cradle, facets still dusty from the salt pan. Even under cabin LEDs it fired ghost-colored prisms. Merrick broke the hush. "Do you believe in omens, Dr. Frost?" "Particles, yes. Portents, no." She snapped the case shut. "But I believe in conditional probability. We alter a system, the system answers." Today the universe answered with a heat shield dreamed of since sci-fi pulp. He rested his uninjured forearm on the table. "I keep thinking about the clause you quoted, if one rescues the other for science, covenant void. I'd forgotten inserting it. Legal must have buried it after redlining." Eloan rolled a loose braid between 2 fingers. "You assumed you needed armor between us. Instead, the armor just dragged us through scandal." Silence expanded, soft as breathing tape. Turbofan whine settled into cruising timbre. At length Merrick spoke, voice quieter than she'd ever heard. I'm good at building walls. My first company IPO'd because I told myself empathy was a bandwidth hog. The strategy worked until a woman in a hotel corridor reduced 20 reporters to bystanders barehanded. A flush crept up her neck. I used optics as a flashbang. Nothing heroic. It was the only time in 5 years I didn't know the exit vector of a room. He angled toward her. The board may cut me tonight. If they do, Schedule D becomes moot. But so might our launch license, the Mojave lab, everything. His eyes rested on hers, blue shot with exhaustion and something unshielded. So I need to ask, if I'm ejected, do you stay and finish Zephyrin without me? The question was a scalpel. Stay, and she preserved the mission but confirmed their bond had been expendable. Go with him, and Zephyrin might die on the pad. She drew breath. I stay with the science, she said, the honesty tasting like battery acid. But the science isn't just hardware. It's the ethos you minted, risk as engine, integrity as differentiator. If they gut that, Zephyrin becomes another profiteering husk. Then I walk. Merrick closed his eyes, exhaled. That's an acceptable threshold. The cabin lights dimmed automatically for time zone crossing. Outside, the Rockies reflected a few straggling stars between cloud sheets. Eloan reached across the table, not touching his hand but laying her fingertips near his. The covenant didn't protect us from feeling, it protected us from talking. Maybe that's the real failure state. His bandaged arm twitched, resisting instinct, then settled. Talk, then. Unfiltered. We have 40 minutes to Dulles. You first, she said. He swallowed. I have never invested in a person. Too variable. But the last 72 hours proved I'd let my company crater if it meant getting you off that salt flat alive. Interpretation, you've become my fixed star. The confession vibrated through her sternum. My turn, she said, pulse hammering. On the mast today I realized the tether cables mimic magnetic field lines. Plasma flows in loops, infinitesimal hugs of charged particles. I understood why physicists say attraction and constraint can be the same equation. When the lightning hit, I hoped the current would rewrite that equation so the terms came out, equal. His eyes darkened, pupils wide. That sounds suspiciously romantic. We can cite it as electromagnetism during depositions. She smiled, nerves glowing. But if you need explicit language, yes, I'm in love with you, Merrick Vale, and no schedule can sandbox that. Cabin pressure seemed to ease, as though fuselage skin flexed around a new internal atmosphere. He answered by sliding his hand the last centimeter to touch hers, light contact, but epic making. No kiss, no vow, only the shared broken law humming beneath bandages and VG-shaped futures. By 21:38 Eastern the jet rolled to a stop in a secured hangar at Dulles. Calix awaited them plainside with a tablet linked to MIT's spectrometer feed. Raw curves blazed across the screen, emissivity plateau at 4100 Kelvin, thermal shock resistance quadruple current shuttle tiles. The board call opened in 22 minutes. They commandeered a conference room in the FBO. Directors' faces tiled across a hollow wall, some dialing in from yachts, others from mahogany studies. Gerald Wexler dove straight to accusations, reckless field conduct, covenant fallout, insubordination. Merrick let him vent 2 full minutes before sharing screen. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Hexadite, he said. Graphs scrolled, test validation, cost projections, patent landscape. Estimated market value, conservative, 12 billion in TPS alone. Discovered today because our chief scientist ignored PR trench warfare to protect data acquisition in hostile weather. You're welcome. A hush. Then Wexler snapped, this doesn't absolve the governance breach. Eloan cut in for the first time, voice cold iron. Governance breach occurred when a protected legal document was leaked by your paralegal and weaponized to smear employees. Dr. Vale risked personal injury to secure core IP, which your faction tried to sell to defense without spectral confirm. Who precisely is reckless? The chairwoman, who had stayed silent, rubbed her temples. Enough. I motion we postpone all personnel votes pending valuation of the new material and immediate filing for provisional patents. In exchange, Dr. Vale submits to independent oversight of field protocols. Merrick inclined his head. Accepted. Gavel icon flashed. Meeting adjourned. In the stunned quiet that followed, Calix let out a low whistle. Board just ate crow soufflé. Eloan sagged into a chair, adrenaline finally overdrafting. Merrick touched her shoulder lightly, not yet daring more in front of Calix. Go sleep, he murmured. You've been awake 30 hours. So have you, she countered, but her eyelids obeyed gravity. Calix handed Merrick a slim envelope. Courier dropped this from corporate archives, sealed 1 year ago, instructions to deliver, if Schedule D integrity compromised. You wrote it, apparently. Merrick frowned, broke the seal. Inside lay a single notarized addendum, upon first material breach that does not endanger life, all intellectual property derived from ZE initiative is to be co-owned 50-50 by Merrick Vale and Eloan Frost. Signature, Merrick J. Vale. Date, 13 months earlier, the night before he'd added Schedule D. He stared, memory rethreading. The clause had been his fail-safe. If emotions ever did interfere, he wanted her protected from board reprisals. He looked up, she slept curled in the leather chair, cheek against her fist, storm knotted at the corners of her mouth yet gone from her brow. Calix read the sheet over his shoulder, eyebrows climbing. That'll cause fireworks. Let it. Merrick slid the addendum back into the envelope. Zephyrin was always a two-body problem, the math just caught up. He draped his jacket over her shoulders, then sank into the seat beside her, exhaustion melting muscle. Outside, rain began pattering on the hangar's corrugated roof, soft, steady, nothing like Utah's wrath. For the first time since Geneva, Merrick allowed himself to close his eyes. Not guard them, not gear up for next contingency, simply rest in the simplest of orbital truths. Two masses in mutual gravity eventually fall toward the same center, and sometimes that center is neither a boardroom nor a launch pad but the quiet midpoint between one heartbeat and the next. In that borrowed peace, the future rearranged itself, still dangerous, still flame-bright, but newly symmetric. Schedule D lay in shards behind them, ahead stretched Chapter 7, unwritten and unscheduled, carrying the faint electric scent of inevitable lift-off. Over the next 6 weeks Cape Canaveral resembled a time-lapse reel in which entire epochs of aerospace history compressed into sleepless 20-hour workdays. Hexadite, whose crystalline lattice MIT confirmed would not spall until temperatures that liquefied standard ceramics, migrated from nitrogen case to furnace, where Vale Orbital's additive manufacturing team coaxed it into honeycomb tiles thinner than a fingernail and strong enough to shrug off re-entry plasma. Eloan floated between clean rooms like a conductor taking every section's pulse. At dawn she consulted with the metallurgy chemists. By noon she rewrote the ascent guidance to account for the lighter nose cone mass. After midnight she haunted the vibration table, watching the new panel survive acceleration profiles that would have reduced older shields to glitter. Merrick shadowed the conversion of Hangar E into a microfactory for the tiles, using his own stock as collateral to keep procurement ahead of schedule. Each evening, when the ridge of the vehicle assembly building blacked out the sunset, they claimed a half-hour on the gantry's top platform, ostensibly to review punch list items but in truth to decompress where no auditor could follow. They spoke of everything the Covenant had previously fenced off, her first telescope, his estranged brother, the unreal fact that the meteorite had waited centuries for a storm timed to their quarrel. They never kissed there, the cameras were too many and the metal too cold. Instead their elbows touched as they leaned over the rail, and that single point of heat felt illicit enough to keep until later. In late February a second board confrontation detonated. Defense World Systems, furious that Merrick had refused co-manufacturing rights to the Hexadite process, petitioned the Commerce Department to embargo its launch on national security grounds. Overnight headlines warned that Vale Orbital was smuggling strategic material off-planet. Traders shorted the stock. Algorithms sniffed blood and amplified every rumor. For 3 days the share price fell like a stage curtain. Calyx fought the panic with a campaign of radical transparency, streaming the tile pressing process, publishing the mineral's spectral fingerprints so academics could replicate it. The gambit risked giving away billions in proprietary advantage, but it starved the embargo narrative, a secret lessons in value the instant it is shared. In the press conference that followed, Eloan stood beside Merrick and handed a tile to the Reuters correspondent who asked whether romance still endangered objectivity. Objectivity, she said evenly, is caring more about demonstrable results than about who gets credit for them. The rest is gossip. A week later the embargo petition died in committee, smothered by letters from 4 Nobel laureates who wanted samples for their labs. Yet victory birthed a new complication no one predicted: the hexadite supply was vanishingly small. Ground-penetrating radar over the salt flat located the parent meteoroid, football field big, but it lay half a kilometer under gypsum and state land use hearings would take years. Zephyrines' tiled nose cone was one batch away from perfect, and the reserve crumb stock could cover only a single shield replacement if tests cracked the first. That scarcity unsettled every engineer's gut. The night before the final flame trench rehearsal, Merrick found Eloan alone in the tile-curing bay, palms braced against a workbench, gaze fixed on the prototype panel like it was a chessboard with too few pieces. The industrial lamps painted fatigue hollows under her cheekbones. "I ran the redline scenario again," she said without turning. "Simulated an anomalous roll at max Q. If the tip takes more than 2 micrometeoroid hits before orbital insertion, ablation could concentrate on one quadrant." She tapped the tile where a hairline flaw shimmered. "We'd need a swap ready inside 90 minutes of landing the fairing. We don't have it." Merrick stepped beside her, sliding a hand around the panel's edge. "You want to delay?" "My head wants to. My heart is screaming to fly." She straightened, met his eyes, steel meeting water. "But science can't run on wanting." He weighed the options, the clock, the trust shareholders had reluctantly renewed. "Then we buy insurance. Not with money, time. A holding pattern at 200 kilometers, one orbit, while drone telescopes inspect the nose. Worst case, we abort to Edwards and land dry. It adds 400 kilograms of extra prop, but we can trade that for payload mass." His smile crooked. "I'll forfeit the commemorative champagne refrigerator." She answered with a wry tilt of her head. "Your sacrifices are legendary." Word of the margin adjustment rippled through mission architecture overnight. No one complained. Better a live rocket with a slightly smaller cargo than a fireworks show over the Atlantic. Launch morning shattered previous visitor records. Donors in mirrored sunglasses packed bleachers, influencers live-streamed from rented balconies, and a contingent of skeptical Air Force observers clustered like storm clouds near the press pens. The Florida air felt pre-thunderous, thick, electric, waiting. Inside firing room for the countdown advanced clean until 22 minutes, when a glycol pump on the second stage oxygen tank hiccuped. Voices overlapped on the net. Eloan's headset crackled with data she had memorized like lullabies: pump voltage, line pressure, delta T across chill plates. The pump restarted within 30 seconds, the software flagged the glitch as recoverable. Still, protocol dictated a hold. The clock froze at T19:59. Merrick stood at the console beside her. "If they scrub, weather tomorrow's worse." She knew it: tropical wave inbound, launch window collapsing for a fortnight. She also knew the pump stutter might recur. In the headset loop control asked for her go/no-go. A dozen engineers inhaled. Eloan closed her eyes, replayed every burner test where hexadite laughed at temperatures that torched alloys. She pictured the drone telescope stowed beneath the trunk, ready to give them truth at apoapsis. When she opened her eyes, the doubt had burned away. "Flight, optics," she said. "Go for launch." The room absorbed the commitment like a voltage spike. The hold released. Numbers scrolled down the big wall and into muscle memory. Outside, steam sheathed the rocket in a second skin. At ignition the sound barreled through viewing stands, glass vibrated, children clamped hands to ears, retirees cried behind camera lenses. Zephyrine rose on a plume the color of superheated opal, radiant, calm at the core, tilting east toward magnetized destiny. In the firing room Eloan tracked telemetry while Merrick watched her, trusting her eyes more than any instrument. First stage burnout, staging, ignition 2. Max Q cleared with structural margins to spare. The nose cone temperature stayed a full 100 degrees below prediction. At orbital insertion the vehicle coasted level, serene as a heron, awaiting its one-orbit inspection. The drone telescopes unfurled, snapping ultraviolet images that downlinked to mission control screens. Pixel by pixel the nose cone resolved, flawless. Not a scorch mark. A collective exhale gusted through consoles. Control handed her the feed to issue final clearance. She keyed the mic, voice steady. Zephyrine, optics. Nose bright and smooth. You are go for Marlin release. Cheers detonated. Merrick set his headset down, turned to her. She expected a high five, standard flight, director etiquette, but instead he drew from his pocket a single sheet of paper, creased and grease-smudged from too many days against his heart. He tore it clean in half, their original Schedule D, recovered from archives without annotation. The two halves fluttered onto the console like spent boosters. Then he produced a second sheet, Calix's couriered addendum, and offered it, pen first. Co-ownership, 50-50, irrevocable. Eloan signed, ink trembling under the magnitude. Merrick added his initials beside hers, then flipped the page and wrote, beneath the legalese, one new sentence, henceforth, love is a mission-critical system. He set the pen down. Cameras and colleagues were all around, but none existed in his focal plane. Their hands met, fingertips first, then full gravity, and every clause previous dissolved like fuel in combustion. The screens above continued to track second stage burn, but for the two souls at Console 7 the more astonishing launch was happening right there, trajectory uncharted, engines at full thrust. Hours later, long after the last press van departed, Merrick and Eloan rode the elevator to the observation deck where Maya Angelou's words ring every launch, we are told that hope is not a strategy. Yet only the hopeful ever ship a miracle. Below them the Atlantic reflected the scar of the exhaust plume, already smearing into pink dusk. He slipped his arm around her waist, the safest and most vulnerable place in the world, and she leaned into the embrace like a celestial body accepting its orbit at last. Behind them Zephyrine arced beyond radar range, carrying hexadite tiles, drone telescopes, and the first line of code in a guidance computer labeled, Frost, Veil Transform. Somewhere inside that code a brand new clause fluttered in digital comment tags, invisible to autopilot but not to history, trajectory update, two-body system confirmed bound. Permalink, forever. 684 dawns after Zephyrine slipped the bonds of Cape Canaveral, a pale ribbon of composite cable gleamed against the Nevada air like a mirage made solid. At its desert terminus rose the Amaranth Anchor, a glass-skinned spindle 300 meters tall whose elevators would one day thread directly to a counterweight platform in geostationary orbit. Journalists like to call it the first rung of humanity's space elevator. Eloan still thought of it as a love letter written in hexadite and mathematics. On this wind-scrubbed morning, as technicians rehearsed the ceremonial tensioning of the cable, she moved through the anchor's atrium with the serene urgency of someone who believes miracles are merely long equations finely balanced. A gold identification badge, VS001, co-founder, swung from her lapel. Beneath it, a burgundy silk dress did its best to hide the bruises earned in week-long shift rotations. Up on the mezzanine she found Merrick hunched over a holographic stress map, fingers splayed as though he could coax the data into singing truer notes. Silver threaded his dark hair now, 16-hour days and one near-orbital cardiac scare had written their own software into his DNA, but the fire in his eyes burned undiminished. He didn't hear her approach until she laid a palm on his shoulder, then the tension in his frame loosed, the way a prime gyroscope aligns the moment guidance algorithms declare attitude locked. "You're late," he murmured, which in Merrick speak meant he was relieved beyond words she'd surfaced from the overnight inspection unscathed. "Cable splice 3 needed a recrimp," she answered, sliding a datapad under his gaze. "Now it can survive a Category 5 gust, or at least an angry senator's filibuster." His laugh was low, private. "We've weathered stronger storms." They had, political boycotts, a short-seller's smear campaign that claimed hexadite caused environmental infertility, even a sabotage attempt from a rival consortium that nearly saw the prototype tether sliced by a drone. Calix had sniffed out that threat with 10 minutes to spare, earning a minor gunshot graze and a lifetime of bragging rights. Through every crisis Merrick and Eloan had held to a single doctrine: transparency breeds trust the way vacuum breeds flame, and love, once admitted, can shoulder more load than steel when designs enter the red zone. Today's red zone was metaphorical and literal. At 10 o'clock local, the board would vote to certify the first cargo ascent, 60 metric tons of lab equipment bound for the geostationary hub. If certification failed, an 18-month queue of experiments would collapse, along with the fragile investor confidence that kept the elevator supply chain oiled. If certification passed, the Amaranth anchor would win a new class of insurance rating, and freight contracts would flood in like comet tails. The vote was supposed to be a formality, until an encrypted packet arrived at 4:17, flagged urgent. Inside lay spectrograph traces from the tether's midsection, captured by an autonomous inspection bot. The traces suggested microvoids forming inside the latest hexadite-reinforced weave, an impossible failure mode that every simulation said could not occur before 50 years of thermal cycling. Merrick pinched to zoom the hologram. If those voids propagate, we're sitting on a 36,000-kilometer garrote. Eloan shook her head. "I don't trust the data." The bot's sensor suite was refurbished after the sabotage incident. What if its calibration drifted? We can't stall the vote on what-ifs. We don't have to. We can run a ground-based interferometric sweep right now, high-power radar ping from Groom Lake, triangulated with the orbital node. She keyed the request into her pad, lining up the frequency bands. Resolution to 1/10 of a millimeter. That takes 40 minutes. The board convenes in 30. Then we'll be downloading results live during Q&A. She flashed the grin that once persuaded him to fund an absurd diffraction prototype in a sunlit hotel corridor. "Risk is the engine, Mr. Vale." He arched an eyebrow at the ancient echo, then toggled his comm bead. "Calix, we're hijacking the lake array. Tell range control we need clear airspace west grid 4. 29 minutes later they stood before a curved theater wall where the board's avatars hovered in a checkerboard of impatient faces. Gerald Wexler was still on the roster, his defense conglomerate had bought a bigger slice of shares rather than surrender influence, but now he looked more wary than defiant. The chairwoman opened procedural remarks. Merrick ceded the floor to Eloan for the technical status report. She spoke without notes, voice steady as first light on a spectrometer slit, summarizing 12 months of tensile tests, orbital bakeouts, and resilience metrics. When she reached the fresh anomaly, several directors leaned forward, scenting blood. "Our autonomous crawler logged unexpected porosity along segment 43, she said, projecting the crimson-ringed scan. "However, we suspect sensor drift. A real-time interferometric sweep is in progress, and data will populate here." She gestured to a blank pane beside the first image. "In roughly 90 seconds. Wexler pounced. "Are you seriously asking this board to rubber stamp a launch based on an experiment you started 30 minutes ago?" Merrick answered before she could. "We're showing you the sausage being made because this board demanded transparency. If the voids are real, we abort expansion, strip the section, and eat the delay. If they're ghosts, we proceed and you can toast Q2 revenues knowing due diligence saved the day." A ripple of muted argument crackled through satellite links. Eloan's gaze flicked to the countdown at screen top, 60 seconds until the radar's first pass resolved. She felt Merrick's knuckles brush hers, deliberately, a live wire of comfort in the corporate theater. The pane refreshed. A monochrome ribbon unrolled, pixel value spiking only where couplings changed material density. Perfect. No voids. The board fell quiet, one by one reading the legend that screamed nominal. Calix's voice came over the master channel, soft with triumph. Amplitude variance within spec. The tether's cleaner than my conscience. The chairwoman cleared her throat. Motion to certify Phase 1 operations. Hands, or their digital proxies, rose. Even Wexler's avatar stayed still, the fight gone. The motion carried. Applause erupted not only from the directors but from the mezzanine above, where engineers had eavesdropped on a hidden channel. Eloan released a breath she'd clutched for an hour. Merrick muted the conference feed, then cupped her face in both hands though grease smudged one bandage line. Under the vaulted skylight they kissed for the first time in front of their entire workforce, and the cheer that followed transcended employee morale. It felt like a planetary roar. Sunset bled over the desert when the inaugural cargo elevator eased upward on magnetic bearings, its carriage aglow like a diamond in heliostat light. Journalists' drone cameras chased it until only pinpoint flares remained, climbing toward the orbiting hub where Zephirine's service module now served as Node 0. Eloan and Merrick watched from the anchor's roof deck, shoulders touching. Below, floodlamps illuminated the hexadite-clad base plates in shifting gold. First ascent is clean, control reported over speaker. Velocity nominal. Tether tension within 1 sigma. Merrick entwined his fingers with hers. Do you remember your first request of me? To never fall in love, she said, resting her head against his shoulder. Most short-sighted non-disclosure clause ever drafted. Consider it permanently superseded. He reached into his jacket, withdrew a slim titanium card. On one side gleamed the Veil orbital crest, on the other, a single URL. Shared access to our private telescope network. New companion keys went live as the elevator cleared 5 kilometers. She ran a thumb over the etched link, recognizing the gesture for what it was, not flowers, not diamonds, but night sky itself, uncharted and unconditional. Above them the carriage disappeared into twilight, its whispering motors the first true murmur of a future in which ground and orbit were as commonly linked as city and suburb. Much remained unresolved. Rival companies would build their own elevators, governments would impose tariffs, hexadite mining rights would spawn litigation nightmares. But in that lavender hush everything felt surmountable. Eloan lifted her gaze to Venus burning low on the horizon. You know, she said, astronomers once called that planet the evening star and the morning star, unable to believe one light could serve 2 names. It took time before they realized both were the same body, just seen from different angles. Merrick followed her line of sight. A proof that perspective can masquerade as impossibility. Exactly. What we're building, she gestured to the sky cable still visible by glint, is a change in perspective for every kid who looks up and thinks space is someplace other people go. Soon it will be the morning commute. He kissed the crown of her hair. And love? He asked softly. What perspective does that change? Everything, she answered without hesitation. It rewrites the boundary conditions. Makes impossible problems merely unsolved. Below, the desert wind swept over solar fields and construction cranes now stilled for evening. Somewhere inside the anchor, code executed on schedule, a small database flag switching the status of one antiquated legal file from active to archived, voided by mutual consent. The system logged the change and moved on, uninterested in human epilogues. But on the rooftop, 2 architects of a new era lingered until the carriage winked out behind Earth's curvature, their breaths frosting in cooling air, hearts synchronized to a mission clock no handbook had ever charted. When they finally descended the stairwell hand in hand, they left footprints in desert dust that would be scoured by dawn yet nonetheless marked the ground as different. Above those fading prints, the tether's slender arc etched a line from present to future, and along it, humanity's first true love letter to the stars ascended, signed not with promises never to love, but with the audacious conviction that love, like orbit, is sustained by continual falling and perpetual flight.